Will we be able to see the people? Oh. Oh, okay. That was the go ahead.
All right, it's 7 o'clock. Woohoo!
All right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Marianne, and this is Kori, and we're going to talk about the book He Had It Coming that we did. And I know Kori's got here's the cover for both of us. Kori, tell me, who are you and what do you do at the Tribune?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, Marianne. My name is Kori Rumore. I am a reporter at the Chicago Tribune. I work a lot with data, and thanks to my partner in crime, my partner in true crime, Marianne Gaertner, we get to work together a lot in the archives of the Chicago Tribune. I've been a reporter here for 8 years, born and raised in Des Plaines, and Marianne and I have gotten to cover a lot of historical look backs, whether it's, you know, the serial killer John Wayne Gacy's arrest, the crash of American Airlines Flight 191 in 1979. We're working on something about the Great Chicago Fire. October is the 150th anniversary. So that's a little bit about me. Marianne Mather, who are you?
So I am a visual editor at the Tribune, and I have worked maybe 8 years as well. You said 8 years, right? Maybe
8 years. 8 years next.
Yeah, I think it's been around 8 years for me as well. I was with the Sun-Times before that, and I used to be a photojournalist, transitioned into editor, and I get to do some fun stuff at the Tribune. Mainly, I work in the archives a lot. So there's a Sunday section called Flashback that comes out where we talk about historical things that happened to Chicago and Chicagoans, and we dig up old photos and old, Tribune quotes, and we talk about them and their relevance to today. And so this allows me to be in our archives, which we also call our morgue, and it allows me to bump into interesting things and find some stories that Kori and I love to tell. So, and I run the Vintage Tribune Instagram account. If you guys have ever been on that, that's where all of the kind of outtakes that we find get put up there. And it's been really fun to communicate with people about that. It seems really popular. So that's me. We should talk about the book though next, right?
We should, but first, let's thank Barbara's Bookstores for having us. If you'd like to get a copy of the book, if you don't have a copy of the book already, there's a green button below, I'm being told. Click on it. You'll get 10% off the book if you use the word event. So thank you so much to Barbara's Bookstores. Let's get into it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and I'm going to go, Kori and I are going to talk a little bit about the book and how we found the materials for it, and you get to see some fun stuff while we do it, hopefully, if I can do this correctly. Does everybody see everything?
Yay, I see it.
Okay, good. Kori, I can't see the chat right now, so when I'm doing this, so you'll have to let me know if I need to stop at all.
I'll keep you posted.
This is the book. Ta-da.
Ta-da.
One of the things that is really fun that Kori and I get to do is be in the archive. And in the Tribune Tower, the archives were 5 floors below Michigan Avenue, which was in the sub basement of the tower. And it was a cold and dark place because we had to keep it temperature controlled for the items that were in there. These boxes that you're looking at are the glass plate negatives, boxes that are housed in there. And you can see that there's some names on some of them. Some of them are just numbers. We can't always tell what we have in there. Sometimes there's lots of surprises. A lot of times when I'm coming in there to find one thing, I bump into another. And that is what happened when I was searching for something else for Flashback, and I saw a box with the name Malm on it. And I wasn't familiar with Malm. A lot of times I can see, it'll say, FDR or something like that. That's much easier recognizable, right? But Malm, I wasn't sure. And I opened up the box, and it was an entire box devoted to one woman, which that is pretty unheard of. And you have to be pretty important at that time period because of the technology. We just didn't shoot a lot of film. You had these glass plate negatives, and it was very difficult to photograph with. So the first photo that I held up to the light, the first negative that I held up to the light to see what it was this photo. And this is a photo of Kitty Malm clutching her child in jail. I didn't know that at the time. I just saw this really striking, scene, and it just is heartbreaking. And I thought, okay, I've got to find out more, But finding out more is part of the fun for Kori and I. This is an example of a glass plate negative. The negative's on the right. This is the little paper sleeve on the left. And it's usually very little amounts of information. This one actually is an example of one that has pretty good information on it. It's always written in handwriting, script. It's in shorthand. You'll see there, W.H. Shelley. That's William, always. H. Shelley. It says Louisville, 1928 up at the top, judges left to right. This is actually a pretty easy one to read. But a lot of them just say Malm or just said Malm on them. And then it had a date stamped on it. That's not the date that the photo was taken. It's not the date that it printed in the paper. It's the date that it was turned into the library. So we have to do a little deciphering when we find these things to figure out what's going on. And this photo shows the actual photo there. This doesn't have to do with our story in our book, but I just thought it was neat to see what the glass plate negatives look like. So once I found the photo in the box of Malm, I had to run back upstairs because there's no Wi-Fi in the basement or in the archive. It's very thick walls. And I Googled who Kitty Malm was. And it came up that she was a character, a real person, that the character, Kori, what's her name? Is it?
Go to Hell Kitty.
Go to Hell Kitty, thank you, in the play Chicago. And this got me thinking, wait, do we have more of these women? And I did not know that the play and the movie Chicago, that the women were based on real people. So then I started doing a little digging and we found out that they were based on real people. And so then I met Kori and said, please help me. I don't know what to do with all these photos. I know we need to do something great and big. We found 4 of the women. We found Kitty, or Catherine Ballack is actually her real name, but she went by Kitty Malm sometimes. We found Beulah Annan and Belva Gaertner and Sabella Nitti, which were all characters in the play and movie. But these were the real women. So I asked Kori, what do you think we should do with this? Kori, I'll let you take it from there.
So Marianne approached me while I was eating at a potluck in our newsroom in December 2017 and said, hey, I have all of these photos of these women. They're all the inspiration for characters in the movie, the musical, the play Chicago, but I don't know what to do with them. Like, where do we even start? Right. And after that conversation, and by this point, we had worked on small projects together, working with the archives. And so immediately I get these goosebumps because it's like, oh my gosh, this is real history here. And we immediately teamed up and initially thought it was going to be a small project for our website. We thought, so this was in December, and it's like, okay, maybe we'll get it done by March of next year. Wouldn't that be awesome? But the more we dug, the more we found. And in addition to the glass plate photo negatives, which have been just sitting there, and some things in the archives, Marianne, would it be fair to say some things in the Chicago Tribune archives have walked away over the years and you can't find them? Yeah. So just the fact that all of these materials were still there in this basement after all this time. And I can only attribute that to the same thing that happened to you, Marianne, where it was a box that said Malm. And if anybody had been curious about it, they would see how much time and effort it would have taken to try to figure out who this one woman was. And I just don't think that anybody really had the time to do that. So this is a long way to say we're not the first ones to connect these real women in their cases to the play Chicago. But I feel like we've done a really good job of exploring their lives. Our goal from the very beginning was, let's be honest about where they came from, because each of these 4 women we're going to talk about came from somewhere outside of Chicago. Several were immigrants. And so we were curious, like, how did they get to Chicago? How did they get to be notable? And then what happened to them afterward, after each of their cases concluded? What happened to them? So that's kind of the premise that we went into for this. And thankfully, both of our editors, Marianne's editor, Todd Patagopoulos, Robin, oh gosh,
Outros,
they were very supportive. My editor, Jonathan Berlin, I mean, I'm a graphics reporter, so I'm used to making maps and charts and working with data. So it took a little bit of convincing. I should say that, like, this is not part of our, I mean, for Marianne, this is part of your day job, but for me, this is not part of my day job. And so when we started to research and we kept our editors posted, like, hey, we found this awesome thing, you know, thankfully they let us pursue this. So that's a long way to say this project, we had no idea in the beginning that it was going to be a book. We thought it was going to be a small thing, just like so many other small things we've worked on together. But I feel like Marianne did such a fantastic job deciphering the photos, placing them, coming up with the caption information so we knew the dates that each of these things happened. And then I started digging into their lives and, you know, trying to find historical documents to back it up. And we also have newspaper clippings in our archive collections. And so those are by name, they're by subject. So to have like the almost 100-year-old newspaper story clippings about each of these women was something else that was just, I don't think anybody else has. Our archives are just really special, and they're only open to Tribune employees. So it's a really special thing that we're able to do.
You know, I wanted to segue that to setting the stage for the time period. I think a lot about this happened in 1924. This book basically is from 1924, if you want to think about it that way. And Rick Hogan wrote the intro, and I love that he really placed these women in a time period. You know, women had just got the right to vote recently. Jazz was the thing, and the clothes, even the restrictive clothes that women used to have to wear, corsets, all those things, you know, now we've got freedom. You know, the women had freedom to be wearing these loose fitting clothing, and music was popular, and gin. And I think this was such a time period where women were really flexing their muscle and stretching their wings and saying, I'm going to potentially have a job or this or that. And so it doesn't surprise me that this is the time period when Murderess Row happens in the Cook County Jail. That these women that we're going to talk about did get into trouble. This one that we're going to start with here that you've been staring at is Beulah Annan. She is the prettiest woman to be on Murderess Row. And I think that was one of the reporters in the Tribune who said that. And she is the character Roxie Hart in the play Chicago. And I do want to back up for just a second. And Kori, you can probably say this a little bit better and explain that the person who wrote these articles in the Tribune and who wrote the play was actually a Chicago Tribune reporter. And I'll let you take that part.
Yeah, I mean, this was the most fascinating thing to me and there were other sources that were able to help us figure that out, to make that connection. But I mean, there is nothing in the Chicago Tribune newsroom. There's nothing of this woman. Her name is Maureen Watkins. And what little we know of her is that she came to the Chicago Tribune in 1924. We're unclear as to how she got the job because she had no professional journalism experience. She was a playwright by training. I mean, she had gone to school at Radcliffe College specifically to learn how to become a playwright. She's from Indiana originally, so she's not even from the area. But yet she's hired, and for about 8 months is what we can date it based on her byline. A byline is a name that goes at the top of the story. Not all of the stories from that time period had a name or a byline at the top of them. So we're not entirely sure the breadth of her work, but we think it was over 8 months. She was specifically hired at first to cover crime, especially crime involving women. So women trials. Yeah, absolutely. And so I just wanted to put that in there when we made the connection, like, oh, it was a Chicago Tribune reporter who wrote Chicago. How do we not know this? We've worked at the Chicago Tribune, you know, at that point it was like 5 or 6 years. How do we not know this? How is nothing in the Tribune named after her? Because I mean, the best we could tell, we say in the book that we believe Chicago in all its various forms has made $2 billion since its creation. So that would make her financially the most successful writer to ever come out of the Chicago Tribune newsroom. So again, it was like, boom, light bulb went off. Very exciting. How do we not know this?
And nobody knew about her. If you ask, who's Maureen Dallas Watkins, nobody knows her name. And the fact that she basically is eliminated from any type of accolades, it was really interesting to us. So, but yeah, so we'll get to Maureen a little bit more later on, but I just wanted to at least set the stage for the fact that it was women writing about Murderous Row and the women there. So we'll get back to beautiful Beulah here and tell her story a little bit. So Beulah Annan is the Roxie Hart character, and she is said to have, she shot her lover in the back. She was married. Her lover came over to her apartment during the day while her husband was at work, and they had some sort of argument. She shot him in the back, and the newspaper reported that she drank wine and listened to Hula Loo on the record player all afternoon, and then called her husband and the cops. So it's definitely a jazz age story, the way that it sounds. It's shocking, and it made big headlines. And of course, she played up her beauty in the press and to the jury. She did several different things where she tried to make herself empathetic or sympathetic to the all white male jury. It's just, her character is really interesting. So the better known character of Roxie Hart that probably most people know from the play and the movie is very similar to the actual things that happened from Beulah and Annan. And
yeah, so much so. I'm sorry, Marianne.
Go for it.
So that if this sounds familiar to you, if you're a fan of Chicago, the musical or the movie, if it sounds familiar, it's because it was pulled directly from the headlines. And like Marianne said, she used her beauty to her advantage. She even faked a pregnancy because she knew it would give her a speedier trial. And when Marianne says she sounded sympathetic, you got to remember these were the days where there were no women in the jury. It was 12 white men. And who's going to convict a pregnant, beautiful white woman, right? Back in the day. So that's what I found very interesting. As someone who didn't grow up, knowing the musical, knowing the movie, came into this project kind of blind about that. It was like, wow, this is exactly as it ran in the Chicago Tribune back in 1924.
Yeah. And the second character, an actual person, was Belva Gaertner. And if Beulah was the beautiful, beautiful young lady, Belva was the stylish, sophisticate. And she also, do you want to tell this one, Kori?
She was crazy pants, but she had a really poor upbringing, and that's something we explore in the book. She and her younger sister were sent for a while to a home, an orphanage for children of Civil War veterans, and her father was a veteran of the Civil War. But yet somehow she gets to Chicago, and she finds this man who's a German immigrant, William Gaertner, who had founded a scientific instrument company here in Chicago and was extremely successful. And the two of them just become inseparable. So much so that they make headlines before they're even married, because technically neither one has been divorced a year. Back in that time, you had to be divorced a year before you could even consider being remarried. So what did they do? They went to the Las Vegas of the Midwest. They went to Crown Point, Indiana to get married. And but that didn't satisfy Belva. Here she has this beautiful clothing. She could have anything she wanted. And she ends up falling for the man who delivers her new automobile, an automobile salesman named Walter Law. And the two go out, they drink too much, they drive home. Somehow a gun is involved, and Walter Law is found dead in the front seat of Belva's car. Belva runs upstairs. Police are like, "What are you doing, lady?" And she's covered in blood. And her defense essentially becomes, hey, I'm too drunk to remember what I did. I have no idea what happened that night.
And she says, but no man is worth, killing. Like she says, no man is worth going to jail over. So they figure, oh, she probably didn't do it, right? So she uses her sophistication, her, her clothing. I mean, if you look at the Tribune newspaper clippings at that time period, it's so interesting. This particular dress that she's wearing in this photo is described in detail, the brown color and the trimming, and they go into great detail about her clothing. Forget about what actually happened, like let's talk about the clothes, right? So I think these two women, Belva and Beulah, are very much aware. And we should say this is the Velma character from Chicago, the play and the movie. So the Roxie Hart and Velma, what's Velma's last name in the play? Does she have a last name?
Velma Kelly. Velma Kelly.
That's it. The two of them, the play and the movie, definitely are very similar to exactly what happened. Like it's almost word for word that you can see what Maureen wrote for the play was exactly what she wrote in the Tribune. What they.
And as you can see right here, her byline, her name is on this newspaper clipping. So she was not only covering Beulah and Annan, but also Belva Gaertner.
Yeah.
So she was there for all of it, to witness all of it.
Yeah. So then we move to the next character. This is Catherine Ballock, or Kitty Malm, as she was also known. And this is the one that I first found. And her story is much sadder. So we had our two kind of rock stars. And now we get into some of the real life sadness of this story and this tale that's not in the play and in the movie. So, I don't know if you want to talk about Kitty. You know a great deal about her history, better than I do.
Yeah, so just to say, Beulah and Belva, they were acquitted. They were not found guilty on their charges. But now we transition to the immigrant women, the poorer women, women whose images just aren't quite as polished, as beautiful, as flashy as the previous two. And so Kitty Malm was an immigrant who married young and had a daughter. She claimed she left her husband because he was abusive. And she starts to take up with a man who, by all accounts, was a career criminal, had already done time for murdering one person. And now she finds herself in a situation where she's tagging along as he and another man try to rob, I think it was a sweater factory.
Sweater factory, yeah.
And so they're in the process of robbing it when they're come upon by two night watchmen. So the man, Otto Malm, who Kitty is hanging out with, fires a gun, kills one of the watchmen, injures the other, and then these three take off. And so essentially, Kitty was there along for the ride. And she ends up getting framed by Otto Malm. He said she was the one who shot the gun. She's the one who did it. And at first she puts on this really gruff persona. She's just very brash and headstrong. And at the same time, not quite as pretty. So
she's young. She's very young. So she's
17. Yeah, she's really young.
Yeah. And I do think so Otto Malm was, she used his last name, she was carrying on with him. Her daughter was staying, I think, with her mother, maybe, or somebody else. So It almost seems like she was running away from her life and got caught up with the wrong man. And of course, if I was Otto and I was already had been in trouble for murdering one person, I'm going to hang if I get convicted for murdering a second person. So who better than to blame it on than the accomplice that was with me, right? And even that night, in the botched robbery attempt, it said that Kitty actually was shot potentially by Otto by accident. Who knows? So this doesn't come out till later. In the beginning, the press has a field day with her in that they call her Tiger Woman. They call her the meanest woman to be on Murderess Row. The way that the newspapers at the time wrote about her, she was already damned before she even set foot in a courtroom. So it's just a lot of the photos that we found and a lot of the stories that we found just looking at the text from the news clippings is just really sad. She was convicted. She was sentenced to jail. She, separated from her daughter. And I think, Kori, you can speak to how the judge who sentenced her actually tried to get her released later
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, the prosecutor in the case was a Pritzker. He was, I believe, an uncle, a great uncle to the current Illinois governor. And the prosecutor, like Marianne said, is one of the people who talk about how bold she was and how reckless she had been. But after she's convicted, she goes to prison in Joliet. And he sees over the years as she starts to try to better herself, she gets an education. Her tone changes. She becomes much softer, much lighter, much more focused on trying to get out of prison so that she could be reunited with her daughter. And in fact, Pritzker, the prosecutor, comes to her defense. Her case goes up for review multiple times, but each time she's denied clemency. She's denied the opportunity to get out of prison. And she ultimately meets a really sad demise. And you feel sorry for her. You really feel like she had it against her from the beginning. She was young when this incident happened, and all she wanted to do was to get back to her daughter and to better herself. So it's really, I think, one of the more tragic cases.
Yeah, it's completely sad when you read through all the evidence. And I think that it's interesting that she becomes a supporting character in the play and movie as Go to Hell Kitty, where she's still kind of that brash, tiger woman, tiger girl, where they liken her to an animal and tough and all that type of stuff, which she still keeps in the play, So.
Yeah.
And then we have our last woman here four of the five. We have Maureen as well, but this is Sabella Nitti, and she's an Italian immigrant who immigrated to the U.S., followed her husband and her sons, and she lives on a farm and probably has a pretty poor, meager existence, and her husband goes missing. And of course, there's no body, there's no husband that can be found, so they arrest her for murder, which to me is astounding because nobody's been found. It's just that one of her sons said, "I think mom did it," which is really it's a weird story. So of course she's taken into jail. She actually gets on the Murderess Row a little bit earlier than the rest of the ladies in 1923. And she doesn't speak English, and she's not given an interpreter. She doesn't understand what's going on. It's a really sad story as well. And what's the name of her character? You remember all this stuff better than I do.
I believe it's Hunyak.
Hunyak. That's it. So that's it from the character from the play and movie. And there's some storylines going here where the Tribune and other newspapers, when they describe Sabella, when they talk about her, she again is talked about like she's an animal. They make fun of her for not understanding the language, and it's painful to read, almost, to see how she was treated and how she was not given a fair trial. And in fact, she was convicted of murder the first time around, I think in 23, before the Supreme Court in Illinois got involved, right, Kori?
Yes.
Yeah.
She's convicted, and she's scheduled to be the first woman hung, I believe, in Cook County. And there's immediate outrage. Yeah. Families, pastors, women come forward and say, "How dare you do that to a mom?" Especially a mom who she didn't understand the majority of her trial. She didn't even know what happened. Nobody had the guts to tell her that she was convicted when the verdict was read until later. So yeah, thankfully though, they're a group of Italian American attorneys who come to her defense and start to mount just this effort to overturn the conviction. Yeah. And it's really interesting because out of all the women that we've talked about so far, we don't have the trial records for Beulah and Annan. We don't have the records for Belva Gaertner. We do for Sabella Nitti. They're housed at the Illinois State Archives in Springfield. And eventually this case goes all the way to the Illinois Supreme Court to be heard. And I got to read through her defense team, all the reasons that they listed why she wouldn't be guilty. And thankfully, the Supreme Court agreed with them. And but there was also, I think at this point, these attorneys realized, hey, we need to make her look like a human being. We need to make her look pretty. We need to help her learn English so she can speak English, so she could write English. We even published in the Chicago Tribune some writing that was allegedly Sabella Nitti's writing in English. They were talking about how she wanted to see her daughters. And here in this picture, you see her two daughters. So thankfully, I mean, it's just such a sad story. But in the end, she gets out of jail and she goes on to live a really long life, which is good. It's a good outcome.
I find it so interesting, what you said about how the lawyers realize that if they polish her image, then in the eyes of the 12 white male jurors and the press and what have you, then she will be better received. And you think about, Kori and I always joke about if there was Instagram or social media back then, just thinking about how these different women would have used those type of social medias to their advantage and not to their advantage, or not know how to use it. And it's kind of, that's how it was back then. Like Sabella and Kitty didn't know how to spin and to make the optics look better for themselves, which I think is interesting, especially now in our time, thinking about how that went down. And then we get to one of the most interesting enigmas that in the book, which is Maureen Watkins. So you can go, Kori. This is Kori's favorite lady, so I'll let her take it.
It is. I just find her very fascinating because, like Marianne said, she is an enigma. She never married. Yeah. It's been a long day. She never married or had children. She was an only child, and from a very young age, we could tell she was going to be something special. She really had an interest in advancing her education by any means possible. Her father was a minister who also dealt in real estate. She and her mom were also close. But she kind of did her own thing, which to me seems amazing back in 1924.
Well, and she got a job. I mean, let's start there. Let's face this. Like, she went to the big city and she went to a newspaper and she got hired as a female reporter, like in 1924. How did this happen? And she never married. She never had kids. She obviously was on a career path and had an agenda of what she wanted to do.
Absolutely. And she studied with the best. She studied at Radcliffe College with a Harvard professor who was groundbreaking, where if you were in his class, you would write plays, and then they were critiqued. They were acted out by your fellow classmates, and then they were critiqued in front of you. And so this was groundbreaking at the time. That wasn't something that was just part of theater back then. So for her to grow up having that experience, we have no idea, since the employment records for Maureen Watkins are long gone, if there were any that existed at the Chicago Tribune. We have no idea why she came to the Tribune, why she decided she wanted to be a journalist, even if it was just for 8 months. Because immediately after she leaves the newspaper, she follows her favorite professor from Harvard to Yale's New School of Drama. And the very first thing she writes is this: Chicago.
This is what we're looking at.
Yes. It was initially called A Brave Little Woman. And after she turned it in to her professor, who gave her, I think it was like a 97, 98%, he immediately started to show it around to producers. And so this is an original. I'm not sure. It says only copy in captivity. This is in Maureen Watkins' own handwriting. It's one of several copies of Chicago, which was originally a 3-act play that came out she wrote it in class in 1925, and it premiered on Broadway in 1926.
It's a pretty quick turnaround if you think about it, right? I mean,
this was controversial. Like, they couldn't get it to Broadway fast enough. Yeah. So it started out in New Haven, Connecticut, which is where Yale is located. And apparently there was a theology professor. We ran it in our paper. Other newspapers ran it as well, who walked out after the first or second act and said it was garbage. And I think that just made it. it just made the anticipation for this to get to Broadway that much better. But this and all of Maureen Watkins' papers are housed at Yale University in the Beinecke Library. And I got the chance to go see it and go flip through page by page. And so she had not just the lines, and it's interesting because if you compare, and we tried to do this a little bit in the book, but when you compare the different editions, like I said, this was originally a 3-act play. There were multiple characters. There were even more characters, and they were all based on people she worked with at the Chicago Tribune or people she covered during her time at the Chicago Tribune. And like we've said, so much of it actually happened. I mean, a lot of it is based in reality.
And a lot of people have said, and this is what a lot of people guess, that she went to Chicago motivated to find stories, a story that she could turn into a play to make a hit, right? And so a lot of people guess that, she only stayed with the Tribune for 8 months, and there, and then she leaves, goes directly to write the play, and kind of maybe use that experience so that she could get something out of it, which is good.
Which is totally fine. She never, at least we're not able to find any record of her admitting that. In fact, a reporter years later asked her favorite professor, like, hey, did she move to Chicago just for this? And he claimed he knew nothing about it, that he knew nothing about her move, and that she never mentioned anything to him about it. But it's, by all appearances, it looks like that could have been the case.
So once it gets to the play gets, seen around, I mean, it is a complete hit, right? There's people who want it banned. There's people that say it's trash. She stands by her work. It goes on screen. When does it become a movie? The first iteration?
I think 1937. 1937.
37. Okay.
That's the poster. That's the poster that's here that you're seeing. And then I think in 1942, there's a Ginger Rogers version, Roxy Hart. So this is from the original.
This is from the original from 37. I thought I had a Roxy Hart one in here because that's from 42. It's like right before the war, and they kind of cleaned up that version. It's not, I think it's just about Roxy Hart, and everything's kind of sanitized and happy, but it didn't go over very well because, everything that was more war related and very Americana did better, and a crime story about Chicago didn't do so well. So even though they made it kind of very sanitized version of the play Chicago, you could take it. Yeah, sorry.
No. And we're really lucky in the book to have analysis of that from Michael Phillips, the Tribune's film critic, and from Chris Jones, the Tribune's arts and theater critic. They're able to kind of lend their expertise to say when these things came out and how they came out. Right. And people, I think a lot of people wonder, me being, I myself was one of them, why did it take so long? Okay, so we're talking about movies that came out in 37 and in 42. Why did it take so long for a musical version of this to come out? And
which was in 75, right?
Which was in 76. 76 is when it premieres on Broadway with it's Chita Rivera and Gwen Verdon. And Gwen Verdon said in several interviews that Maureen Watkins promised her the rights to turn Chicago, the play, into a musical. But there's no record of that. I was able to go to Jacksonville, Florida, which is where Maureen Watkins spent her final 3, maybe 4 decades, and review her estate records. And it wasn't until after she died and her in a bank became the executor of her estate that the rights were sold to 2 Broadway producers. For the initial funding for that was $2,500. And there were some stipulations in place saying, hey, you guys are going to come up with a play with a Broadway version of this in 5 years, or we'll give someone else the opportunity. And so Maureen Watkins died in 1969. I believe the rights were bought in 71. And in 76, Chicago premieres on Broadway.
Yeah, and it's a huge hit. Well, this is the movie, but yeah, I mean, and if you think about it, Maureen Watkins, she did not want anything done with it while she was alive. After the initial success that she had, and she traveled and she had gone to Hollywood to be a screenwriter or try her hand at screenwriting for a while, she kind of becomes a hermit and lives with her mother, goes back home, to where her mother is in Florida, and lives out the rest of her life in obscurity. And a lot of people had approached her at that time to get the rights to try to create a musical or put it on, make it a new movie, and she wouldn't sell. So it's interesting that it took her death and then the bank changing that into to allow it to become what it is today. And I think about if that didn't happen, I mean, this is one of the most, recognizable plays and movies, I think, in our history, in our culture. I mean, everybody knows the jazz hands and the music, and at least I think everybody does. But I wonder what Maureen would think about it today, like what it's become. It's kind of become this sexy, jazzy show, whereas you guys saw some of the photos of the real women, and it wasn't always sexy and jazzy, But I think that, I guess we've talked about how it's become like the movie is what a lot of people have seen. I think that was maybe more widespread and really brought it to everybody's attention. But isn't it one of the longest running plays?
Yeah, it's the second longest running musical on Broadway. I think it's almost 10,000 performances, second to Phantom of the Opera. Yeah. And I think I saw the other day that it's going to start up again on Broadway September 14th. Now, you have to remember there are also multiple traveling versions of this. I believe it's played in 30 some countries in multiple languages. It's popular in Germany. In fact, Germany was the first place that Chicago, the original play, played in outside of the US. So it's interesting to see how it still continues.
Yeah, just very it's like this small little thing that started has just bloomed and blossomed, and it continues on and on and on. And how fun and interesting to find the base material that this was built off of,
Yeah, and Marianne, maybe you could talk a little bit too. And if anybody has any questions, we're happy to answer it. If you've read our book already and you have some questions, or if we can help you figure out if you really want to buy the book or not, feel free to ask away. But Marianne, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is you have a photographer's eye. What did you feel when you first found these glass plate negatives for these women? What was your impression? You just talked about how glitzy and glamorous the musical is, the movie is. What were your impression after seeing these old photo negatives?
Yeah, I think that, when I saw that first photo of Kitty Malm, a sadness, I knew something really sad had happened here. And it was just such a poignant moment. But then as I got to look for all of them, and I knew who they were at that point, the discord, the difference between what I knew from the play and the movie and the fun of that play and movie, how everything's kind of lighthearted and very crime centric and street smart. And then I was looking at these photos and I was like, this is like, not awful. I just felt like, okay, there's a whole different story here, and these are real people and real lives. And I know we can have fun with the jazz version of it, but just to think about these women going through this, I wonder what they would think, about what today is the telling of their story. Although, didn't one of them actually didn't Beulah get to see the play?
Yeah, so we think she did. There is a quote from her saying that she wanted to see who was going to portray her in the stage version. So we think we did. And also, I found a clipping that Maureen Watkins apparently had a small role in one of the New York versions of the show. She showed up in a scene with other reporters. So she at least has seen it one time. So I found that very interesting. Now, Belva Gaertner goes on to live, the Velma Kelly inspiration goes on to live a long life as well, and eventually moves out to California. So it made me wonder whether she had seen the multiple iterations of it.
Right.
I don't know.
So we have a question. Did you find any other women criminals during your research? We always find women criminals. But I did try to search to see if there were other women from the play, and I didn't find any others. I did find other women that were on Murderous Row in 1924, but they didn't have we didn't have as much on them. So we decided to focus on these 4 women. So there's a few here and there, but we really wanted to narrow the scope down to this particular story, to Murderous Row in 1924. And it's really cool. I didn't get to actually share any of these, but there's some photos in Murderous Row of the women together, and they're posing. And it's so interesting to me as a photographer and as a photojournalist, we wouldn't have access. There's no jailer saying, come on in, get pictures of these people in jail while they're playing cards together. I just, the access that they gave the photographers and the reporters and Maureen back then to go into Cook County Jail, to Murderous Row, and just be like, hey, I'm going to take a picture of you through the bars while you're drinking your coffee and having your morning, paper read. It's just, it's invasive in a way. And then also you can see how the women are posed and they're trying to play up certain aspects. It's just, I think about that now, how we would not have that, that type of access to the people, but also I don't think we need that access. I don't think that that's necessarily right, but it definitely, those photos in the jail where you see them posing, one of them actually has Sabella looking at a newspaper like she's reading it. Obviously this is stage stuff.
Yeah, one of the things I was disappointed in, we really tried to find the matron character is consistent from the play, and so it's who was the matron, and that was one thing we just weren't able to find. That I was really disappointed because we were hoping to get information on that.
What about the lawyer? We did find who that was. William O'Brien, is that correct?
Yeah. William O'Brien was the inspiration for Billy Flynn. And again, a lot of it is so pertinent to what happened in real life. So Beulah and Nan's lawyer is the inspiration for the Billy Flynn character. And we decided not to get into the men because Beulah and Nan's, kind of aloof but hardworking husband. That was who he was. I mean, there are pictures that we have in the book that Marianne found, where he's in court and he's holding up his hand. You could see the oil, the grease, the dirt. He has mechanic's hands, And so, again, I mean, in the original play, there's a reporter character who, when Chicago played on stage in Los Angeles, California, Clark Gable actually played this reporter character, but we see that character eliminated in the musical version and then in the movie version. So and that was based on another Chicago Tribune reporter. That was Jake Lingle. Is that his name? I forget who ended up being murdered. That was the inspiration for that character. That's a whole other story. So Laura, we went a long way to answer your question. I hope that answers it. But it's the interesting thing about doing these things, and I'm sure Marianne can speak to it better than I can, but you start digging for one thing and then you start digging for something else. You come across another name and it's I got to Google that name. I got to see what's in our archives for that person. Yes. And so it's you end up with all of these pieces and then it's how do we put this all together? So we could have written a lot more.
For sure. I would like to say, and on the note that here we are talking about these 5 women, the reporter and the 4 women on Murderous Row. And this is a book produced by women, Kori and myself. Yeah. It was designed by a woman, and it was exactly. And it was almost an entire woman support network. Besides our few, we had a columnist, Heidi Stevens, write an intro, and a couple of our esteemed male colleagues also helped out. But I felt like this was such a woman-driven project that was kind of neat to have it all that way.
It was so interesting because in the background, I mean, we're doing all of this as our news production team, all of us are getting ready to leave Tribune Tower for good. And so Marianne and I would be in the basement. We're going through things and our archives made the move with us. Don't worry about that. They're in a safe place. But just trying to pull all the materials that we needed to write this book. It's when the Me Too movement, had just come together and women were marching around the country. And so just to say that, yeah, we felt really supported in putting this together. And we hope if you've had a chance to read the book that, especially if you're a true crime fan, we hope you enjoy seeing it from a journalist in a news photographer's perspective of finding the actual materials about these women. It's written pretty matter-of-factly because, hey, we're journalists. So, there's no embellishment. If you've read The Girls of Murder City, which takes some liberties with the facts, we like that book very much, but we made the choice not to read it until we were done with our book, because we didn't want it to influence the matter-of-factness, the truth, We
wanted to keep a historical record, right? Yeah, kind of like almost like a museum piece in the way that you're able to see the actual materials that we're talking about when you look at the book, which is, I think, one of the coolest things. We have old envelopes that are from the archives that say like Murderess Row, so we scanned those in. And so it's just kind of neat. They're all dirty and everything. I should say that is the other thing that is a striking difference between the play and the movie and everything. All those old photos, everything looks so dirty. You ever notice that? Like, the walls look dirty. Everything looks like it needs a good wash job. So
just like our hands did after we were like down in the archives, like digging through all of this old newsprint and dust and dirt and all of that.
So one of the questions, Kori, that I was going to ask you to think about that we've always talked about before is how this play, how what Maureen wrote affects our image as a Chicagoans, because we have the Capones and the, all those types of gangster stories. And how do you think this helped or hurt us?
Oh gosh. Well, and maybe that's part of it. I think anybody who is not familiar with Chicago of today, you talk about Chicago and they're going to bring up Al Capone. They're going to bring up prohibition and gangsters and jazz and a lot of shadiness, I guess.
We're kind of known for that, We're kind of known for the crime, maybe. So
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing to me is, in light of everything we've been through in the past year, a little over a year, is, I mean, that was 4 or 5 years out after the Spanish influenza hit our city. And so just to see that people were starting to feel more free. And like you mentioned earlier, women had more liberties to do whatever they wanted to with their lives. So hopefully it's slightly inspiring in kind of a weird way. Like, hey, these women were trying to do what they wanted to do with their lives.
Maybe not always the right way.
Right.
Like, don't go out and get so drunk that you can't remember if you shot the guy in the car next to you or in the car seat next to you. It's not a good idea.
Yeah, that's not so good. That's not a good look.
Yeah, Belva said, you know what? Gin and guns don't mix. That's what she said.
Yeah. So, she learned her lesson, right? Maybe.
Yeah. I would also add that I think in some ways, the play and movie Chicago and what Maureen created has not always helped our image as a city, because we kind of have this, along with Capone and all the other types of things, we have this image, and of course our gun violence now, we have this image of just this crime-filled city. And I do think that there's things like this that maybe are not helping that, because it makes it look like we just have this history of it no matter what, That being said, this could have happened anywhere, and this does happen everywhere. 1924, this is happening all over the US, not just in Chicago. So I just think it is interesting that the play that she wrote became such a big hit with the name Chicago on it, and forevermore it's remembered. So, yeah.
We just have a few minutes left. So I just want to say thanks to Barbara's Bookstores for having us.
Yes,
and again, if you smack that green button at the bottom of your screen and you go to it, you can buy our book, He Had It Coming. We're a 10% discount with the word event. And also, if you're not currently a subscriber to the Chicago Tribune, Marianne and I would like to remind you that that's what helps us keep our jobs and potentially helps us come up with other great content, other things that Marianne finds in the archives. Marianne, why don't you talk about some of the things you have found in our archives recently?
Well, recently, well, just recently I found Tony Lombardo's, it's a crime thing, sorry guys, we're here for crime, right? Tony Lombardo, who was killed in 1928, I found a whole box of glass plates on him, and that was really interesting. I did not know the story that he was the head of the Italian Union at the time, which was, he was a buddy of Capone, and he was kind of like a chief. And that head, whoever got to be head of the Italian Union, did not last long. Their life was pretty much, you got appointed and then you were going to get offed, you know? So poor Tony, he gets killed in September in 1928 while, this is the craziest story, sorry, as I digress, while he's there, everybody's out at State in Dearborn, one of the busiest spots in the loop, and they're watching an airplane being pulled up into a building to sit on top of a building for an ad for a company. So everyone's out on the street staring up like this, and guess who, you know, some assassins took that moment to be like, oh, I think we'll just, in this crowd, we'll kill this guy and off him now. It's really crazy stuff. So we uncovered some photos of that, his lavish funeral. He lived in Cicero at the time. He wasn't able to be have a church funeral because the Catholic Church and Cardinal Mundelein at the time had said no, gangsters were going to be have church funerals, so they had to do it in the house, and yeah, very interesting stuff. So that was kind of a fun one just recently that we found. But the archives are, I mean, we've just scratched the surface of what we can find. You know, I wish we could be in it all day, but you know, we found the Eastland disaster photos of the largest inland maritime disaster that killed 844 people in our Chicago River right downtown on a sunny afternoon or sunny morning. You know, there's all sorts of just amazing history in our morgue and our archives, and just being able to pull it out and bring it to the world and to Chicagoans, that's probably the funnest thing we do. Kori and I love it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And we feel really lucky to be able to do it. And like I mentioned at the beginning, the next thing we're working on is a look back at the 150th anniversary of the Great Chicago Fire. So look for that later this year. October is the anniversary of that. And so, yeah, and again, it's very exciting because our archives go back that far. The Chicago Tribune existed then. And even after being burned out as part of the fire, I think it was 2 days later,
Yeah.
2 days, but the Tribune was able to start putting out a paper again. And so we've had just a really great time so far digging into that and working with a team of reporters and editors and photographers to try to explain that, because I have to admit, I don't know that much about the Chicago Fire. At least I didn't before we started to dig into this. And it's just fascinating.
It's just something that I think everybody knows about the city, you know, like, oh, the City of Big Shoulders, the Great Chicago Fire. But really, when you get down to the details, you're like, well, actually, do I know anything about it? I don't actually know when it happened, or, you know, like how many people were killed or where it happened at all. So that'll be fun. That'll come out in October, and you guys can all wait for that fun.
Yeah. And thanks again. If you bought the book, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at the Tribune. And if you're buying the book soon and you have any questions or you like it, let us know. It's always nice to hear the feedback. And I mean, we live here, we do the work. We look forward to it, to hearing from you.
Just any last minute questions? I just want to make sure. We just had one. If there's anybody else that's got a question, throw it out now and we'll try to answer. If not, forever hold your peace.
Yeah, because my 6-year-old, I can't keep him quiet for much longer. So
you guys probably saw my child walking behind me. So sorry, I saw him in the back. So, although I did make sure the animals were out of the room so that they wouldn't also make noise.
I know. How come our families can't be this quiet for an hour? You know, most nights.
There goes my son again. Well, thank you guys for coming and tuning into this, and we really appreciate it. It's always fun for us to talk about the historical work that we get to do. We wish we could do it 100% of our time at our job. So.
Yeah, that's for sure. And just one more time, hit the green button. You'll get 10% off He Had It Coming with the word event. We really appreciate it. And Barbara's Bookstores, thank you so much for having us.
Yep, thank you. And I don't know, Laura, how hold please.